Jules Verne wrote many books.
And we've made many, many movies of those books. From the silent era Mysterious Island to mid-century attempts like 5 Weeks in a Balloon and Master of the World and Journey to the Center of the Earth, to goofy modern interpretations with Brendan Fraser or Jackie Chan. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Georges Méliès's Voyage à la Lune arguably are the best of the lot, and they've entered our collective consciousness. When you think about submarines or space travel, their images come to mind. The 1956 Around the World in 80 Days, however, may be the most Jules Verne movie ever made. I'm a big fan of Jules Verne, but I am a big fan of a lot of things, some of which are high art, Shakespeare, Joyce, Toni Morrison, and some of which are not, B-movies, new wave music, Disneyland. Jules Verne falls somewhere in the middle, brilliant ideas painted with pulp fiction prose. Like Mark Twain, Verne published his novels through a subscription service. The volumes of Les Voyages Extraordinaires were devoured by ordinary folks hungry for far-flung adventures. Today, we usually think of Verne as a sci-fi writer because pushing the envelope on new technology was his passion. Amphibious aircraft, space rockets, submarines, all of this gave sparkle to his works. In Around the World in 80 Days, though, technology appears to take a backseat to adventure. But that largely has to do with our perspective. The movie version shoehorns a balloon voyage in as an homage to Verne's first big hit, 5 Weeks in a Balloon. The sequence underlines adventurer Phileas Fogg's interest in new technology, and though not in the novel, this scene became iconic. The gorgeous balloon was on display at Madison Square Gardens and then at Disneyland, and it shows up on the cover of the novel frequently, and may have influenced the name of David Niven's autobiography. But the technological elements which inspired Verne are things that we would overlook: the Suez Canal and the transcontinental railroads in India and America. The movie makes the most of these, and I'll admit that if I toss this movie on late at night, I usually start with one of those long railway segments. They are spectacular. Which brings me to another Vernian element in this picture. Broadway producer Michael Todd had pretty much invented Todd AO vision for this movie, although he had used the technology for the musical Oklahoma, and he built Hollywood's new Cinerama Dome to show off the new wraparound screens. You were given a printed program, and there was an overture, an entr'acte, and exit music as if you were at an opera. The film's gigantic scope shows in all of those travelogue segments, and unfortunately, it also shows in these set-bound sections such as Cairo and Bombay. In this, it bears close ties to Méliès's Voyage à la Lune, which the 1956 film actually opens up with an abridged version of. Méliès, like Todd, created an epic, iconic Jules Verne adventure film, and despite cutting-edge special effects and limitless imagination, you can still feel the confines of Méliès's tiny greenhouse studio. Had he lived to see them, Verne would have loved both of these films, their virtues speaking to his soul and their limitations being outside his peripheral vision. The Voyage Extraordinaire series, despite the perceptive, detailed scientific research that keeps it famous today, is still 19th century adventure fiction. Verne's characters are mostly national stereotypes.
Are you quite sure, sir, that this is not just Gallic braggadocio?
Monsieur, you are now addressing the second most celebrated balloonist in Europe.
And who is the first?
He is not available. He was buried last Tuesday.
Precise Englishmen like Phileas Fogg, daring, gun-happy Americans like Professor Barbicane, tradition-bound Asians like Princess Aouda or the heroes of Verne's Adventures of a Chinaman in China. The novels open vast vistas of international travel to folks from the big city to French farm towns, like the Grant children circumnavigating the globe in Les Enfants du Capitaine Grant, or Michael Strogoff galloping across Russia, or the voyages up and down the Amazon in A Floating City and its sequel. Verne's imaginary voyages inspired in me a desire to do a bit of gallivanting myself. Visiting these countries for real opened up much more sensitive details than Verne's armchair traveling, but it took his spark to get me going. In true Verne fashion, the 1956 Around the World trades in stereotypes. In light of it having beaten the anti-racist Giant for Best Picture, the scenes of Indian thugs and Native American savages may make a modern audience shift a little in our seats, but the film spends most of its runtime lampooning the English with broad strokes. Though Fogg is our hero, fun is frequently poked at his clueless colonial racism.
Boss man here, him back pretty soon?
I should say the probabilities are strongly against it.
I beg your pardon. Why aren't they speaking French?
Because we are in Spain, master.
I told you before, do not spoil the natives.
Yes.
Fogg is the embodiment of the British paradox. He is addicted to politeness
If I ever catch you in here again, I'll cut you up in 1,000 pieces.
That won't be necessary, I assure you.
and schedules.
My Thursday midday meal has always been and will always be hot soup, fried sole, roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, baked potatoes, suet pudding and treacle.
Yet he's also ready to dash off for an insane bet, rescue a princess, buy an elephant, or a steamship, or invent a prairie sail cart. Americans come in second place for the cultural satire in this film.
Now don't miss, boys, and damage the woodwork.
John Carradine's gun-toting wild man
Maybe a foreigner, but you're true blue.
is flanked by circus-like elections, alcoholic daredevils, gangsters, and hicks. Knowing that the directors were both naturalized Americans from English and English-Australian backgrounds explains some of this, but any fan of Verne will recognize that broad national strokes were half of his means of building character. The other half? Well, that's just mania.
His morning toast had to be 83 degrees Fahrenheit. No more, no less. Extraordinary. How does one take the temperature of toast?
Since I'm discussing the cultural issues in this film, Shirley MacLaine. Whitewashed casting was the norm in 1950s Hollywood. Flower Drum Song still goes down in history as a shocking use of an Asian playing an Asian. It took multiple failed castings before David Lean accepted the superb Omar Sharif to play an Arab in Lawrence of Arabia. I'm glad that we are mostly past that. But what's weirdest about MacLaine here is this is peak level Shirley MacLaine. It's 1 year past The Trouble with Harry.
I hit him over the head with a milk bottle and knocked him silly.
And not long before The Apartment. In both of those films, she oozes down-home baseball apple pie sex appeal. She manages okay as a repressed Oxford-educated princess, and she makes her bottled-up passion for Fogg pretty clear.
Would you care to hear about the time I drew a flush hand in diamonds?
If you'd care to confide in me.
On the other side of the spectrum, the film makes no attempt to explain why the Mexican comic Cantinflas was cast as Frenchman Jean Passepartout, and it doesn't matter. Cantinflas rules in this movie. Chaplin called him the greatest clown of all time. His Passepartout, which has very little relation to the Jeeves-like character from the book, manages to be both everyman and Superman. He defies death, he dances, he fights bulls, he infiltrates a cult, he does gymnastics, he does a James Bond on top of a train, he steals your heart. I have no idea why Cantinflas was cast in this film, but even with all the great performances by David Niven, Robert Newton, and all the cameos and the Reform Club baddies, Cantinflas rules. It's no wonder why the Spanish language markets listed him as the star. He is arguably the lead of this movie. Curiously, this movie's lack of self-reflection is perhaps the reason I actually find it so appealing. There's movies like Eat, Pray, Love, or Crazy Rich Asians, or Under the Tuscan Sun, which use travel as a means of self-discovery, putting the protagonist's spiritual journey at the center of the story. And that's fine, but it turns the lives of the millions of people who actually live in those locations into sort of an object lesson, with the protagonist as the center of gravity. The hero changes no one but him or herself. The opposite would be the standard adventure film, your Indiana Jones, Mission Impossible, James Bond, in which the hero thunders into a location, changes the local landscape to achieve his goals, and then rockets out again. This happens a little bit in the India and America sections of Around the World in 80 Days, but it's played for laughs, as Passepartout realizes how badly his European tricks play out in these unknown cultures. By and large, though, Around the World in 80 Days is about four clueless outsiders pursuing their own goals. A wager, food on the table, family, or professional success, with the whirling planet behind them as their backdrop. Passepartout, our surrogate, is the one who notices, and he marvels at it all. But these four characters did not come to change the world, nor to buy its gelato and prayer beads and improve themselves. Today, this movie is rarely brought up except as a punchline when discussing Best Picture statues that went to the wrong film. It beat both Giant and the Ten Commandments, which has not settled well with posterity. But Around the World in 80 Days, unlike those two arguably better made films, knows that it is just a movie. And ironically, it's the 1956 film that changed my life. It not only made me a fan of Jules Verne, but it inspired me to look out for faraway lands with the wide open eyes and the fearless spirit of Jean Passepartout.
This is the end.